Good evening all, and welcome. I hope you're ready, because tonight we are going to be venturing into the world of the unknown. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. It was the 4th of July, a Thursday, and my roommate and I decided to go for a bicycle ride. Wednesday happens to be my day off, but since my job does not open for the holiday, I worked that Wednesday, so I would have the same amount of hours for that pay period. I thought it would be nice to go out. After all, I also had 2 free movie vouchers. My roommate has a pickup truck, making it convenient to carry our bikes. We head to an area that is about 30 miles from where we live. It's a beautiful upscale community that has nice roads and the gorgeous scenery that South Florida has to offer. Before I continue, I must sidetrack information to the listener. My boss's dad has recently left on a week-long cruise with his wife. At a certain point during their voyage, he tripped and fell. This caused him excruciating pain, and as a result, his family took him to the doctor where he was given horrible news. He had cancer, and it had spread throughout his body. For some unknown reason, the doctors never caught up to his illness during his regular checkups. Things deteriorated rapidly after that. Last thing I knew, he was being transferred to a different hospital, from West Palm to Miami. I must admit, I'm not that crazy about old people. They can be bitter and complain a lot. However, my boss's dad was a sweetheart and a joker. It was always pleasant to be around him. He was the type of person, just like his son, that everyone got along with. But now back to the story. As I'd said before, my roommate and I had headed out for a bike ride and the movies. We took a long trail along a major road in West Palm. That day being a national holiday, traffic wasn't bad, and I was using a single-speed bike, and I could not keep up with my roommate's 19-speed bike. I stopped, sent him a text, and turned around. We agreed to meet where the truck was parked. I used the same road and stopped at a local Walgreens to buy something to drink. Remember, this is the middle of summer in Florida, and it can be very hot during the day. I continued on my bicycle ride, and when I was nearing a certain spot by a business plaza, a certain feeling fell upon me. It is not easy to explain. It was like a voice, but not in the sense of when you verbalize words to a person. Instead, it was like a voice that seemed to have originated from within me. The voice told me to turn left. Next thing I know, I find myself turning left without even thinking about it. As I reached the parking lot on the plaza, I saw a female gathering shopping carts for the Whole Foods located at the plaza. I smiled and waved at her, and she smiled in return. Then her eyes got real big. 2 seconds later, we heard the most horrible noise of tires squealing and then a loud bang. The sound of twisted metal, and I turned around, and to my surprise there was a car crash. A 4-door Toyota Corolla that was totaled, and an SUV in a really bad shape. For reasons I do not comprehend, they had crashed head-on. What struck me the most was that they had crashed at the very same spot I was about to cross with my bicycle. Needless to say, I would have been crushed between the 2 vehicles, and I would not have made it out alive. Now, going back to the subject of the old man. The next day, Friday the 5th of July, I returned to work. My boss looked pale and depressed. He seemed distant. Before I even say good morning, he tells me his father had passed away the day before. I ask him what time the old man died, and that's when things got strange. The old man had died a few minutes before I was about to cross that intersection. Coincidence? Maybe. Divine intervention? Well, I'd like to think so. After all, I wouldn't be alive if not for that voice that warned me about the upcoming danger. This experience taught me to always listen to that sixth sense gut feeling, butterflies in your stomach, whatever you want to call it. This feeling is always right, and thus you should listen to it. One day maybe it will even save your life. This man was a good person. Perhaps he was fond of me too, and decided that I was too young to perish. I've heard a lot of ghost stories growing up. I'm Italian, and my mother's family is from the south, known to be far more superstitious than people are here in the north. Ghosts, haunted houses, desecrated churches, gnomes, elves living underground. Hearing all this kind of thing is commonplace in my family, and it can be a great source of fun during holiday gatherings, especially if you're a little bit drunk. This story, however, is different, in a way that spooks me to no end. My grandparents were both born a few years after the end of World War II, and they were both really young when they moved to Milan with their parents to study and work. There they met, had a kid, and married at the age of 18. Living in such a vibrant environment, like the city of Milan was during the 60s and 70s, made them develop pretty liberal ideas. They joined the Italian Communist Party. My great-great-grandfather had been in the resistance, joined workers' marches and unions. They were and still are both atheists. My grandma took part in women's union and the feminism movement. They are not the first two people I'd think of when we are talking about superstition and close encounters with the paranormal. And yet, when they were in their late 20s, they went on holiday to Tuscany, to a small farmhouse. Everything was perfect as you'd expect in a Tuscany holiday spot to be, until it wasn't. During the night, they woke up in their rooms to the sound of steps and low chanting. They waited in the dark, surprised and terrified, as the door of their bedroom opened and a procession started to walk in. They looked like friars, clad in dark tunics with their hoods covering their faces, singing in Latin and carrying what looked like a coffin on their shoulders. They circled the bed, stood in front of my shaking grandparents until the song ended, and they left in the same way they'd come in. My grandparents waited until the spot was clear. They gathered their stuff and ran away at the speed of light, turning their car around in the direction of home, never to return again. To this day, I still haven't decided if they're playing an elaborate prank on all of us. If they took some sort of drug that night, and now they're too shameful to admit it. I think LSD was pretty common back then. Or if they were the ones getting pranked by a group of hilarious people who took it way too far. It's still insane to think about, and I can't help but feel uncomfortable at the genuine fear I think I can see in my very rational grandma's eyes when she tells the story, and my granddad's complete avoidance on this subject. When I was 9, my sister was the victim of a hit and run. This happened right up the road from where we lived, 2 houses up to be exact. About a year after her passing, I was walking across the street 2 houses up, when I heard my name yelled very loudly. I stopped and looked behind me. No one was there. When I turned around, there was a car in front of me. It was passing me, and the woman driving clearly didn't see me. She was looking at the radio. She drove past me and I finished crossing the street. There is no doubt in my mind that if I hadn't stopped, I would have been hit by her car. I looked and never saw anyone outside or at the window. I never figured out who it was who yelled my name. Could it have been an echo of my sister? I am a woman in my 60s. I come from country redneck farm stock. While I have a good imagination and am very creative, I live firmly grounded in reality with a non-denominational Christian belief system. I grew up knowing spirits were real, both evil and good. I technically don't believe in ghosts as the shades of dead people floating around doing things, because my belief system says that when you die, you go to one of 2 places, heaven or hell. I live in a very small neighborhood in Alaska. It's a cul-de-sac with only 5 houses on it. My husband and I have lived here for several decades. At the time, my scary experiences happened, and we were well acquainted with all the neighbors. Times have changed since then, and now we are only passing acquaintances with most of them. It's a quiet neighborhood where everyone respects everyone else's privacy, but will step in to help anytime it's needed. As some of you might know, in the summer, Alaska has a great deal of sunlight. At midnight in the summer, it's still light enough out to read a book outside and easily identify things even from a distance. It's like twilight in the lower 48. So many unexplainable things have happened in this neighborhood that I can only choose 3 of the most vivid to tell you. All 3 episodes remain unexplained to this day. The first one occurred during a summer night. It was almost midnight, and I was standing in my backyard having a final cigarette, accompanied by one of my dogs, an elderly, very gentle golden retriever mix. A movement at my neighbor's house caught my eye, and then my little girl growled. That was unusual for her. I looked at my neighbor's house and saw a person wearing blue jeans and a yellow jacket crouching by her car, apparently peering in with their hands cupped to the glass. I stepped forward to ask her what she was doing, worried that perhaps she'd locked herself out, and although I had extra keys to everyone's house, she didn't want to wake me up that late. As I moved forward, the figure straightened up and moved towards the rear of the car. It didn't walk, it flowed. Without the up and down motion of walking, as if it reached the rear of the car, it exploded into a yellow mist and vanished. I stood there stunned. My cigarette burnt down unnoticed while I stared and squinted. I tried to make sense of what had happened. My little dog was pressed against my legs, shivering. Since it was so late, I didn't want to disturb the neighbor, so I went back inside to bed. The next day, I waited until she got home from work, but thought better of saying anything just yet. I needed to try and debunk or explain what had happened. That night, I went out at the same time of night with the same dog, stood in the same spot and lit a cigarette. Nothing happened. Her car stood serenely in place in the last rays of sun setting on it. No figures moved, no bushes were in the way. There was nothing that I could see that explained what happened. The dog was unworried. I eventually told her what had happened, and she wasn't surprised at all, rather a bit relieved that someone else had finally seen something. The second episode happened in the winter, where the lighting is the opposite. It's dark most of the day. My pickup truck was parked in our driveway. I had brought several bags of dog food earlier that day. That summer, I had fallen over a dog and broken a finger on each hand, and had just recently had another several surgeries. I went to feed the dogs and realized I had forgotten to bring a bag of dog food in. Being an independent sort, I didn't ask my husband to get the food, but shoved on a coat and some boots and went out to the truck. I'm only 5 feet tall, so getting something out the back of a 4-wheeler drive truck isn't exactly easy. I switched on the outside light, walked past our Mustang that was parked in the car spot. I struggled with the tailgate of my truck one-handed and poured the bag of dog food out the back to the ground. As I reached back to close the tailgate, I looked up to see a man wearing jeans and a t-shirt standing beside the Mustang watching me. Of course, I assumed it was my husband who had come out to help, and when I got the tailgate shut, I looked back to make a sarcastic comment about his timing. No one was there. The light was still on. The driveway, carport, and my truck were brightly illuminated. I still thought maybe he'd just gone inside because, winter, and he didn't have any outdoor gear on. I managed to haul the bag to my shoulder and trudge into the house. To my surprise, he was sitting on the couch watching hockey wearing a tank top and shorts, not being outside watching me get dog food wearing jeans and a shirt. The third thing happened during the summer, but it was the daytime. It was hot, and I was in my yard lounging in the shade wearing shorts barefoot. All at once I heard what sounded like a very close gunshot. It echoed off the mountains. I went out through the back gate without stopping to put on shoes as one of my neighbors emerged from her house. We conferred and decided where we thought the shot had come from and began walking in that direction. We noticed another neighbor standing in his backyard, looking in that same direction, so we all went over to speak to him. We were all lightly clad because of summer. To Alaskans, 60 degrees is a heat wave. I was still barefoot. We joined him in his yard and conferred further upon the matter to see perhaps if we needed to offer help to the yet unknown victim. However, there was no further commotion, and we decided it must have been a firecracker or a backfire. And we all three turned at the same time to walk back to the front of the house. Because I was barefoot, I paused for a second to look down to make sure I wasn't going to step on a rock or something, and a strange dreamlike feeling overcame me. I looked up and saw my two neighbors already walking up beside the end of the house. In front of them, I saw another woman oddly dressed in a mid-calf blue denim skirt, knee-high winter boots, and a blue down jacket. My two companions disappeared around the corner, and I followed, expecting to see this third woman, and wondered why she was dressed in winter gear on such a hot day. I was close enough behind them that there's no possible way for her to go anywhere else, except right in front of them. There was no other woman. I looked at both neighbors puzzled and asked, "Did anyone else just walk round the corner, a woman wearing a winter coat?" They both looked at me like I'd grown a second head and said no. We discussed it briefly, but the neighbor who lived there met my eyes and seemed uncomfortable, so I dropped the issue. Later I discussed it with the neighbor I had walked over with, but she had not seen anything and thought perhaps I had seen someone in the distance. But we both knew that that wasn't what happened because there were trees all around us and there's no distance in which anyone can see. It has been years since these things happened and I still have no explanation. Many other small things have occurred over the years that I can't explain or debunk, but these were the three most dramatic. Years ago, when my mother was a little girl, she would have conversations with no one. It took a long time for my grandma to finally come to terms with the fact that my mother had an imaginary friend. She would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and start talking. When my grandfather would go to check on her, he'd ask her what she was doing. She'd be staring at a corner in the dark, speaking to someone they couldn't see. They are staunch atheists and don't believe in anything, not even the paranormal, and hastily brushed off any idea that she could be talking to anyone than a made-up friend. Her friend was called Barry. Years later, when I was a young girl, I started speaking to someone as well, but only when I was in my grandparents' house. My grandparents by this time obviously knew that my mum's imaginary friend was called Barry. And after about the age of 8, my mother, out of the blue, just stopped speaking to him. Well, I was about 4 at the time. My ability to speak was coming along quite nicely, and I was insisting that I was talking to someone. Out of a joke, my grandma asks, "Who are you speaking to, honey?" "Barry," I reply. I kid you not. My mum said that my grandparents and her face both fell into shock. She asked me again, and I repeated the same name. They all assumed it was a weird coincidence. Then my mother tried thinking back and asked me what he looked like. I described his appearance, all dark, that I couldn't see his face, and that he was wearing a hat, almost like he were made of smoke, I said. My mum didn't say anything, at the time, but years later, once I stopped seeing Barry, did she set me aside and asked me a few questions about if I remember Barry. When I tell her that of course I do, she said some things she remembered about him and tried to see if they were the same. We matched at nearly every point. She was quite afraid and asked a local priest to come and bless the house. I don't have any younger siblings yet. I wonder if they'll still see Barry if they go to my grandparents' house, whatever he is. This is something that happened to me when I was 12, but I remember the fear I felt then quite clearly. I was visiting my dad. He lived with his fiancée and her mum. I've always been very sensitive to spiritual things, and they have a lot of darkness in their house. That much was clear from the moment I walk in. It was unnaturally dark inside and the air was thick and hurt my chest. I know that might seem insignificant to some people, but they also had very strange artifacts in their house. I can't explain what was wrong with them, but they just gave me really weird vibes. They also had a dog, a pug named Tank. He and I spent a lot of time together and he was a very friendly dog. I never heard him bark at anyone or anything, just a really chill dog all of the time. So I think my second day staying there, my dad's fiance's mum bought me a bar of soap from somewhere. Come to think of it, I'm pretty sure she said she bought it from a secret place. It was a black bar of soap called Devil's Forest. My dad's fiancée was pagan, however I get the feeling that her mum was interested in some kind of witchcraft as well. She had unusual objects in her room, like dolls and crystals and stuff. I know that witchcraft isn't inherently bad, but I did get a particularly bad feeling from her. I thought nothing of it at the time. It was just a bar of soap. It smelled nice, and so I thanked her and put it away in my room. Later on, I was the only person at home, and I was playing outside with Tank the dog, and they had a really long backyard that ended on the Brisbane River, pretty much isolated with no people around. I was walking to the end of the yard nearest to the river when Tank stopped in his tracks and started barking at nothing. It was weird because I literally had never heard him bark before. I kept calling him, and usually he would run right over to me, but he refused to move. I felt like he was watching something, so I went over to him to try and figure out what it was, maybe a cat or something, but he still wouldn't move, and there was nothing around. He barked at an empty spot in the air, and then he just kept barking. Whatever he was staring at appeared to be moving towards the house. I honestly thought nothing of it until that second. I had left the back door open, and suddenly I felt really nervous, but I couldn't explain why. I just felt like I shouldn't have left the back door open. Tank barked at the door, and I ran over to it. He followed me and I quickly shut it behind myself, then went upstairs and I forgot about it for the time being. Until I realized Tank refused to come upstairs with me, where my room was. Again, he was barking at nothing. I couldn't see anything. My dad's fiancée came home and was really confused as to why Tank was barking. I realized with a small sense of dread that Tank was barking specifically at my door, the room I was staying in. Trust me, there were a lot of things in that house that gave me bad vibes, but nothing compared to what I felt then. My dad's fiancée remarked offhandedly that maybe he could see a ghost, which didn't make me feel any better, especially since I was starting to think the same thing. I stayed up late that night playing video games, and everything seemed normal, until quite suddenly I felt like I knew there was someone behind me. So, terrified, I heard floorboards creaking, and I felt like whoever was there was attempting to sneak up on me, just coming closer and closer, slowly. I could feel a shiver descend my spine, and I decided that I had to turn around, because what if someone had broken in? I was going to scream if I saw something because my dad's room was right there. I turn and there was nothing. Yet I felt like there was something there, right in front of me. I just knew that something was just in my face, and I wanted to close my eyes, but I thought if I opened them again, then it would show itself. It was absolutely terrifying, and I ran to my room, jumped under the blankets, and left the door open. I had probably the worst night in my life. The night before, Tank had come and slept with me. We were together most of the time, but on this night he simply refused to enter my room. I awoke at 1 a.m., suddenly feeling very scared. I had the feeling that if I opened my eyes, I would see something terrible. I didn't know what, just that it was going to be terrifying. I stayed under the blankets, shivering in fear, feeling very, very cold. I prayed and prayed but couldn't shake my fear, and after hours of praying and being paralyzed by fear, I told myself the same thing I had when I thought someone had broken in. If I see something, I'll scream, and Dad will come to get me. At this point, anything was better than the terror I was feeling. So I worked up the courage for about another 20 minutes to open my eyes, and when I did, I didn't see anything. However, my eyes were drawn to the black bar of soap I had left on the bookcase by the foot of my bed. I had one very clear thought: get that thing out of here. I grabbed it, and since the bathroom was right next to my room, I threw the bar of soap in there and shut the door. The sound of the soap hitting the ground was what really made me think that it was possessed. It didn't weigh much, about the same as a stick of butter, but the sound it made when it hit the tiles was so loud. I thought I had accidentally broken something, but I was too scared to open the door. I ran into my dad's room, realized it was 5 a.m. and that I had stayed up the whole night paralyzed in fear. He had to go to work, but I stayed in his room because I was too afraid to go to mine. His fiancée gave me a teddy to cuddle, which was really nice, and I finally managed to get some sleep. An hour later, I got 2 calls, one from my mum and one from my best friend. At about 6 a.m., I hadn't spoken to either of them since the previous day. They had no idea what happened that night, and both of them called me to ask if I was okay. I asked why, and they both told me that they couldn't sleep the whole night, and that they felt something terrible had happened. I was so scared I started crying. There was no way they could have known what happened. Yet, they were both up all night feeling terrified just like me. I didn't leave my dad's room, and I kept shutting the door because it felt safe. Tank was finally with me again, and he stopped barking. I stayed there until my dad got home from work, but I was too embarrassed to tell him that I thought there was a demon in his house, and asked him to take me home. He agreed reluctantly, and while we were packing up my things he said, "Don't forget your soap." And because I was feeling much less scared by now, I went and opened the door to my bathroom to get it, which I planned to throw out the moment I got home. And I remember very, very clearly that I pegged the soap to the other side of the bathroom, so it should have landed either in or near the bathtub. But when I opened the door, it was literally right there at my feet. The only explanation is that it must have moved to the door. I freaked out, told my dad I wasn't touching the soap, and went home that day and slept fine. But my mum and I both agreed when I told her the whole story that I wasn't going back there. Let me start by saying we had a good and loving mother. She put us before anything and anyone. She sometimes worked 2 jobs to support the 6 of us. She did the best she could with what she had, and what she was capable of at the time. I also know she had a personal passion for spiritual growth, the metaphysical, and occult sciences. I think she was addicted to the sensation of phenomenon. I think in some ways, it opened the door to the other side. It just became part of our lives, and we happily were along for her journey. When I was 5 years old, my big toe was cut off in some bicycle spokes. My siblings were told not to put me on the back of the bike without my shoes on. I guess my sister didn't get the memo. I was the youngest of 6, 4 girls and 1 boy. I slept with my sister closest to my age, but after the accident, I couldn't be in the same bed with her because I had to sleep with this thing that helped my foot stay in place, and she might have moved it in her sleep and consequently hurt me. My mother made me a cozy pad with blankets and pillows next to the couch, where I could safely sleep in the living room. At that time, we lived in a townhouse apartment in Hollywood, California. It had a big living room with very high ceilings. To the left was a wide arched doorway that led to the dining room and kitchen. All the way across the archway were rolls of film strips my mother got from her job, and they streamed down across the doorway like beads. Straight ahead was the staircase, and under the stairs in a cubbyhole was my mum's desk. To the right was a really long leather couch and my bedpad. Running all the way up the wall to the ceiling behind the couch were huge psychedelic Zodiac posters. People thought our place was groovy, late 60s, and we all saw little things here and there, nothing really scary, more odd than anything. A few times we heard running down the stairs while we were all sitting on the couch or creaking in the hall. My sister and I saw someone who looked like our grandmother standing in our bedroom doorway for a long time, just staring at us. It was too dark to see her face. My mum told me that I spoke about seeing angels, and how I said that I picked her before I was born because she was what I needed for my life. I might remember bits and pieces, but that has all pretty much faded away. But this did not. My eldest sister and I were watching The Late Show in the television room. Her on the couch and I on my pad. Everyone else was in bed. I must have fallen asleep, so she turned off the TV and covered me up and then went upstairs herself. After a while I awoke. It was so quiet. The moonlight coming through the kitchen window was shining on the film strips hanging from the dining room archway and reflected small color images on the floor. Because of this thing holding my foot still, I couldn't really move. As I was laying there, my head on my arms, my eyelids were getting so heavy. I had my arms stretched out across the floor, looking at the pretty colors from the film dancing on my little fingers, when I noticed a change. The color reflections were moving. I looked up to the archway and the strips of film were moving like a breeze hit them. I laid my head back down and watched them start to sway back and forth. Then they began swaying in sync with each other. I didn't know to be scared. They kept swaying, then all of a sudden they stopped, just like that. All of them stopped at the same time. I was very curious. I propped myself on my elbows, still laying on my back, and tilted my head. I saw a figure behind the film casting a shadow next to me. The film strips started to separate, as if someone had walked through them. It was an almost human form, but it was grey with no distinctive face. It had a male energy. I could see him as he stepped closer. I looked down and noticed he had no feet. I looked back up at him, but instead of him across from me, now he was crouching down 2 feet from my pad on the floor in front of me. I remember wondering why he had no light coming from him. I wasn't scared at that point. I simply didn't understand. He got even closer, and I leaned over my head. I innocently looked up at him. He was way less than 2 inches from my face. I should feel his cold breath on my nose, drying my eyes to the point that my tears started rolling down my cheeks, and for the first time, I felt real fear. I attempted to call for my mother, but nothing came out. My heart was beating so hard and fast I could hear it. I tried to scoop my body back, but the thing holding my foot wouldn't let me. He was leaning his whole form over my little body, and I began to sweat when he started making an inhumane noise. It started out like radio static, a low chuckle into a high-frequency long screech, then a pain piercing into my big toe. It felt like a long, burning needle going into the bone. I wet the bed with fright, and I heard a loud ringing in my ears. Everything started to echo and spin. I remember seeing the room flip upside down as it all turned white and I passed out. I woke up to my mother cradling me, calling out, "Baby, baby, are you all right?" I guess she had a feeling, so she ran downstairs, but said that something told her to check on me. She never told me if she saw anything. There was blood coming out of my toe. The doctor said I must have ripped out the stitches in my sleep, even though I know I didn't move. My sister just recently told me after that happened, our mother had the apartment blessed, and that's why I never saw that thing there again. All I know is that she never let me sleep alone in the living room. In fact, after my toe healed, I slept with my mother from that point on, and she held my foot all night. I was living in the Gold Coast, Queensland, Australia, last year. I was there to get some English certificates and take a break from law school. I lived in a neighbourhood that's not really well regarded by most people there. It's called Southport. Coming from a third world country, I was pretty sure I could handle myself, which is pretty secure compared to where I live. Before telling you guys my stories, I feel like I have to explain why the place is thought to be dangerous by most. Southport is close to Labrador, another neighbourhood, and those parts of town are well known to have a lot of drug addicts. They tend to move into abandoned places and turn them into crack houses. At least, that's what you hear. However, I think the people that tell us those things are actually trying to scare foreigners a little bit, just to make sure we're more aware of our surroundings. I mostly heard this from my teachers back in school, where I took training for my tests. So, now for the first story. Most nights I would go out with my friends to hang out at Surfers Paradise. So my daily routine would be school in the morning, then I would go to my part-time job, go back home, work out, shower, and go out and have some fun. But one day, for whatever reason, I decided to grab some takeout at a nearby restaurant and stay home to watch Netflix. We had this burger restaurant about 150 meters from the back door of the building I lived in, and this door led to a somewhat dark street where you couldn't see a lot of activity at night. It was around 8 p.m. when I left to grab the burger, and then went straight back home. But as I was returning from the store, I got this weird feeling that someone was walking behind me, which made me turn around. At that moment, I saw a guy wearing a red hoodie crossing the street. After that, I began walking faster. A few moments later, I started running to my place, thinking it was one of the crackheads that lived nearby. I must have been about 20 feet from the same back door I mentioned earlier, and I saw that weirdo run towards a garage gate and disappear. I couldn't believe what I saw. I didn't hear any noise from the guy trying to jump the aluminium gate, as it would have made a really loud noise for sure. That's when I decided to go back and check out what had happened. I left my food close to the door and started running towards the gate. When I got to the expected gate, there was an electric fence above it, which meant the guy couldn't have jumped over it. And also, I must have run back there and not even 10 seconds later he was gone. There was no way he could have opened that gate without making a noise. He simply vanished, and I'm still unsure about what I saw. This other incident is a little scary. It was my day off, and I decided to buy some stuff at the nearby supermarket in the afternoon. On my way there, I crossed paths with this old man. He was wearing a black fedora and a red button-up shirt, had really dark skin and a strange moustache. He also had a cane, which didn't seem to have much use because he was walking pretty fine. When I passed by him, I felt like I got electrocuted, and for a moment my arms felt numb. I wasn't really sure what happened, but it was bizarre. In any case, I just carried on going. There's a very strong presence in our home, and it was here last night. Let me give you some backstory. It first started 3 months ago. Our 4-year-old's first night here had an imaginary friend, and he's never had one before. I remember specifically feeling the presence before he started talking to seemingly no one. Frightening. It was like whoever this was minorly playing with him. A small interaction. But at one point I heard him ask, "Do you want something to drink?" and then proceeding to bring me a drink and ask me to open it for him. I watched. He never took a drink of it. Our thermostat would somehow be changed when my boyfriend would be back here without me. His coffee pot also kept getting shut off by the switch at the back. It wasn't me doing it, and our child couldn't reach. I at one point even paid $13 for a list of previous people that lived here to search for obituaries. It came up empty. We live in the state of Oklahoma, so you're allowed to not disclose to tenants if someone has passed away there. 2 months of living there, whatever this thing was definitely started to show a stronger presence. It often appears childlike, but at other times it does not. Things get turned off quite often. The fan, the TV, our speakers in our bedroom. Things fall off the wall a lot. It could be a coincidence, but it usually happens only on the nights when my boyfriend and I are together. I've tried to pay attention to the patterns. There have been a couple of points where it sounds like there's someone rolling a ball across the attic. My boyfriend experiences a lot of sounds. He'll be in the shower before I'm home from work and have to get out because he thinks he hears our son crying or screaming at times. I also see shadows you can't see through, more of a dark figure. I often feel as if someone is peeking around the corner looking at me, and when I look, something moves so fast my eyes barely catch a trace of it. Throughout the last 3 months, we've both also been experiencing terrible dreams, so vivid, so real, all nightmares. We even once burnt sage. Everything calmed down, and I felt as if this was when the entity started showing itself to me more as a child. In the now, we had been talking to a friend on the phone about this, and she was stressing her concern about how it seems as if this is something very dark. The dreams have been persistent since we began speaking to her. I feel as if this is angry, like it's been called out. Things keep falling off the wall while we're sleeping. I also felt as if something kept making my dreams go dark, and I would wake up with a jolt, and one time could feel such a strong presence that I couldn't move. Also, our son's teddy bear has vanished into thin air. He hasn't taken it anywhere and it's not here. I've searched the house from top to bottom. The cars, the garage, around the house. It simply isn't here. Not to mention, the attic is one of the closets that it's screwed shut. All of the carpets in the house are old. There's even carpet in the bathroom and kitchen. But there's new carpet, funnily enough, in the bedroom closets. I'm not sure what this entity is or what it wants, but I don't think its intentions are as innocent as it makes out. My mum suddenly passed a few months ago, and within a day of her passing, my wife and I are constantly finding dimes at our feet in all kinds of strange places. Here's an example. When we talk about her, sometimes within minutes we'll find a dime on the floor or a counter that wasn't there before. I had shoveled snow off my front step last week, and after I was done, I could clearly see there was absolutely nothing on the step, as I swept it after shoveling it too. And within 2 to 3 minutes I turned around to pick up the shovel, and turned back around to see a shiny dime sitting on the step. My wife started keeping the dimes, and oddly enough, some of the years coincide perfectly to the years of our births. And trust me, I'm only telling you a few stories, but there are probably at least 30 to 40 strange appearances of dimes since her passing a few months ago. Could this be significant? Hey guys, it's Mort, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. As always, I'd like to extend a huge thank you to my patrons, who help support the channel immensely. If you would like your name on screen, feel free to checking out my Patreon, and for a small amount of money every month, you can get your name on the list. And for a little bit more money, you can also get some funky perks. So think about it, and I would really appreciate it. But of course, it is down to you. Right then, well, tonight's stories were fun. I hope you liked them. I always like paranormal stories. I'm trying to find a few more ghost stories for the upcoming days. I think that might be a fun one to do. Let me know if you're interested in that. As always, a huge thank you for your incredible support, guys. The other day we hit 200k, which is a pretty big milestone. I mean, when I started out this channel, I did it mostly for fun. I never really thought I'd get anywhere, certainly not to 200,000 subscribers. So thank you to each and every one of you who's helped me get there. When I reached 100k, I actually had a really special video that I launched. It was a story that a subscriber sent me. It was really long. I had a lot of fun doing it, and I got lots of members of lots of the community involved, lots of other YouTubers and creators, and I was really glad that I could incorporate so many cool people into that video. I haven't done anything for 200,000. Maybe I should. Perhaps I will a little bit later. Maybe 250, because, you know, it's 250,000. Yeah, let's put it on hold until we get there. But, as always, thank you so much to everyone. If you're interested in seeing that video, I really do recommend it. It's one of the first ones on my playlist, The Very Best of Mort. Come to think of it, I haven't updated my playlists in a while. Maybe I should do that. In any case, that gives you a lot to talk about in the comment section, so, you know, I'll check that out once you guys have written stuff. Alright guys, for now I'm going to sign off. Sorry for blabbering so much. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.